That's what I know. That's what I know. That's what. Baby, I've been slaving every day of my life. Not a day I pray that love will come my way. Night and day.
start. And I start with welcoming you all to this session. I'm the president for the International Association of Universities, and I'm happy and I'm eager to moderate this session for the leading universities into the future. I would say that this is really a follow-up on the session yesterday on the reimagining our future together. Because who is going to lead this? It's the university leadership who will be the performers and who will do a lot of the works. So the universities, they are really enablers to transform. And I would say leaders at the top level, but also leaders within the universities. Some words that I think has been brought up through the days is universities are unique. They are key actors, and they are key actors in the societal transformation. They have a societal responsibility, and this is very much been connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. We do have financial issues everywhere, and that is, of course, something that institutions have to live with and deal with. We have, unfortunately, more and more geopolitical and political constraints that we have to live with. Still, we need internationalization. That's a base for the higher education. And I'm very happy that in one session it came through that we have to rethink internationalizations with quality and values. We also have technology development, and this is for both good and bad. We have to see that there is drawback also, and technology will not be the only way, or maybe also a constraints for the future, sustainable future. So with that said, we need also interdisciplinarity, and I think it's not raised too often. We need to raise that more. We need competence in humanities, in social science, and in arts to actually live up to the three pillars of the sustainability: economical, ecological, and societal. And cooperation has been brought up. And finally, what's the most important, and I'm happy that this is raised, and that is the value on which higher education is best. The values which actually are needed for higher educations to fulfill this role in society. And that, of course, includes academic freedom, equity, inclusiveness, solidarity, diversity, and much more. And we have to, in all types of cooperation, in all kinds of strength, we have to live to those values. With this said, I would say that this is what International Association of University is working with all the time. And that's the things that was the reason for inaugurating IAU 70 years back, to have a community to cooperate within the higher education. So I'm not going through the IAU, but IAU is contributing to the work of UNESCO, but also to other international and intergovernmental organizations. And of course, being the global voice and the global network, the legitimacy and the strength of the voice of this association is the cooperation and the actions and engagements of our members. And they have to come from all around the world. And we still want more members to be there to strengthen the voice, not for the organization as such, but strengthen the voice for higher education for the future. There is a need of this. And this session is part of preparations for the General Conference of International Association of University, which will be held in Dublin, the 25th to 28th October, to which I invite you. And the topic is relevance and value of future society. And I hope that some of you can come there, and it's also a general conference for bringing new board members and also president after me. We have not been able to meet, and I'm very happy to meet here for 2 years. So now go to this session, and I will start with introducing the very, very distinguished panelists, and they are all members, and they are representing different parts of the world. So I start with Patrick Dean, so the president of Queen's University and the MCO president. And then we have Inga Salenina, rector of Mykolas Romeris University in Lithuania. And Roberto Semiranta Escalante, I'm not used to say Semiranta, Roberto Escalante, Secretary General of UDUAL, and also a co-vice president with me, and we have been working together. And then we have two persons taking action, and they will be online. And this is the Andrew Deeks, and I'm not sure, do we have Puleng Kabula there? Are you there? I'll start with Andrew Deeks.
Yes, I am.
You are. Good. So I start with Andrew Deeks, the president now of Murdoch University, Australia, Asia Pacific, and also Puleng Kabula, who is the principal and vice chancellor of University of South Africa. So welcome everyone, and we are looking forward to this. And the format is as such. There is one question raised, and that will be on the screen. And one of the panelists is going to give their views on that question. And then two of the panelists is going to react on that panelist's introduction to that question. So the setup, and I will try to keep the time for this. Good luck. So let's start with the first question. Can we have the first question on the screen? So, opening research and knowledge circulation, how can the higher education sector engage in a meaningful and system-wide discussion on knowledge circulation and knowledge commons, as well as a better cooperation to synergize the resources globally? So, welcome, Inga.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, UNESCO and IAU, for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. So I will make my first contribution on opening research and knowledge circulation. Universities have always been places where knowledge is created, preserved, and passed to the new generations of students, scholars, surrounding communities, and society as a whole. But today, the humanity is undergoing major existential challenges of climate change, armed conflicts, health crisis, rapid technological changes, global disparities, erosion of democratic values and democracy, rule of law. In the face of those challenges, worldwide academic communities have to react much faster than before and take responsibility for the urgent, unprecedented actions, create transformative solutions, freely sharing the scientific advancement globally. The global scientific response to COVID-19 pandemic has showed us enormous potential and impact of open science, with unprecedented amounts of sharing of ideas, research content, and data within and beyond the scientific communities across different countries and sectors globally. It was proved once again that knowledge could make a real impact to the society, decision makers, when you encourage and enable free knowledge circulation and open access to research results. One of the best examples, of course, the collaboration of researchers in production of COVID-19 vaccines, which helped to save lives during the pandemic. Also, open online educational resources, which enabled to prolong learning process online to enormous amount of schools and universities worldwide. Also, digitalization, artificial intelligence-enabled processes have fastened in all the sectors as never before. During those 2 years, we got enough proof that open access to research results and data, free knowledge circulation, is a global space. In a global space are necessary tools for educators and researchers to go further. and especially to step down from the current commercial publishing systems. Research assessment, reward systems, market-oriented ratings and rankings, which are posing tensions, unfairness, and exclusivity rather than accessibility and inclusivity. UNESCO recommendation on open science, which was issued last year, created a common understanding of what it implies to, and raised a global commitment to unlock access to science, data, and knowledge, including open educational resources and also citizen science. And it is a huge step forward in understanding access to knowledge and information as common public good and human right, inseparable from the right to education to all, including flexible formats of formal and informal learning and lifelong learning possibilities. It is no doubt that open science movement gradually will change traditional closed science systems into a more inclusive, accessible, efficient, and transparent. But of course, it will take time. Changing of science dissemination cultures, not only at universities but also at societies, it will require a major national, regional, global policy level reforms and, of course, financial support. Academic communities worldwide are welcoming and supporting open science movement. For example, in Europe, we have an excellent examples of regional and national initiative in this domain, such as European Open Science Cloud Initiative, rise of institutional, national open access repositories for research outputs and data, free access to publicly funded research projects results, and much more to add. But at the same time, in parallel with the mentioned positive changes, higher education institutions at the same jurisdictions are forced to adjust to the market-oriented indicators, as they are highly dependent on their governments in a struggle for public resources, which fully depends on the success rates at external institutional evaluations, global ranking systems, and their results there, mainly counting quantitative data extracted from several monopolistic commercial publishing platforms, which, unfortunately, sometimes have nothing in common with a real impact to the communities and to the society as a whole. In such context, the new UNESCO Futures of Education report is timely and promising to return back and go further with the principles of humanistic, socio-cultural education paradigm, which in pre-pandemic period, unfortunately, in many countries was mainly dominated by economic neoliberal paradigm. The new social contract, which is proposed by UNESCO, returns us back to the fundamental understanding of education as a common public good, fundamental human right, and gives hope that it will initiate certain mind shifts of our states, governments about higher education sectors, broadening missions, its relevance and importance to the society. And finally, global challenges need global response. I hope that international organizations such as UNESCO, IAU, and other global educational networks certainly have a fundamental role in consolidating leadership for promoting global cooperation in education and sciences, for the implementation of this new social contract, together with the worldwide academic communities and other stakeholders, creating new instruments, open collaborative platforms to synergize resources globally that will certainly help us academic communities to build a more peaceful, just, and sustainable futures for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I will have a hard task. So, reaction on what Inga said. I invite Lengabula online.
Thank you very much, Pam, for the opportunity to share some insights. I want to start engaging in these reflections from the context of the Global South, within the understanding of knowledge as an arena of engagement in order that the betterment of humanity, but also of ecology or ecological flourishing as important insights that we have to think around. But I also want PAM colleagues to really appreciate that this engagement allows us not only to think around the local and global contextual exigencies that enable us to reflecting around universities or higher education and the future. That begs the question, what is the current context and what invites ideation, research, engaged scholarship, but also the student support in order that the universities are central in shaping, defining, but also co-constructing the futures that we need to grapple with. My own colleague who has spoken before us has already mapped some of the challenging or opportunities that the current context proposes for us as universities, including those around climatic changes, ecological destruction, material and inequality or unequitable distribution of opportunities, of access to higher education, as well as the distribution of resources in the global south and in the global north. There are other contending matters that we identify as important aspects when we think about open education and open knowledge systems as part of thinking and rallying arena of the future is how then do we look at multilateral or science diplomacy as an important imperative, not only as the only side of engagement, but also that which enables us in the global south and in the global north through the knowledge systems that we can engage with. The third aspect that I think is important to posit is that whilst the imagination, the future, and the research that is engaged in is for the benefit of society, and the inventive spirit for knowledge is not only for utilitarian purposes, but also for edifying and illuminating ideas around the future and research that supports that, is the fact that in the current context, in the somewhat aftermath of COVID-19, there are lessons that we have learned which we could build on for the futures of higher education. The first I suggest is that the bifurcations of societies we would have experienced, but also magnified by COVID-19 and the distribution and access of what it means to being human and who had access and not access to these opportunities is an important imperative as a value proposition for higher education systems that are inclusive, that are attentive to humanity, that also recognize bias as an obstacle to the knowledge arena as a liberating and epistemic imperative. And this is quite important because if we do not attend to these issues of equity, that's when those who live on the margins, those who live with capabilities, and those whose knowledge systems are not appreciated would not have appreciated. I tried to look at the time that you allotted.
Yes, I look at the time.
And I was trying to ensure that
your time is out.
so I will not disadvantage
You
myself,
will go back.
but I will also try to ensure that there's equity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I then find my points?
No, I think we have to continue.
You're conscious about it, but I'd like equity.
Yeah, okay. So then I give the floor to Patrick to make some comments.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you to my colleagues. They've made my job very easy. I must say thanks to Inga and Pule. They've really covered, it seems to me, all the most important issues. I thought I would, with my few minutes, just comment on some of the challenges with regard to this particular issue. And then say a little bit about possible solutions, because the question asked us to talk about mechanisms by which we can address this issue and ensure the freer flow of information and knowledge around the globe. Well, there are two things Inga, I think, pointed us towards these that I want to just take note of. One, this is the human nature problem here. Universities globally are competitive institutions, particularly in the North. And I think this is a conference in which we are focused on the good of the planet and of every nation on it, and of the deployment of higher education in support of that goal. The reality that is very difficult to get around is that in certain jurisdictions, and here I'll speak as a person who's from North America, competitiveness exists as strongly next to cooperativeness as you can imagine. It's one of the interesting tensions of the system, that we vie with each other, but we also support each other. And I think that is a very significant challenge. And of course, it's entrenched by certain of the global rankings, not all of them, but certain of them do. And to the extent that rankings, to some extent, represent the reputational future of institutions, they will have an influence on institutions. So the question is not so much whether, let's say, institutions like mine in the global North are reluctant to partner for global good. The question is, can they afford to in their own jurisdiction to ignore these rankings? So that's one consideration. The other one, which is a newer one, and this has to do with another current, geopolitical current, and that's the issue of research security around the world. So on the one hand, I'll speak for our institution, very committed to open access, but at the same time equally worried about undercurrents of espionage and so on around the planet that might call into question the security of the research being done on our campus, and therefore the willingness of researchers and the nation at large to share that information. Very distasteful issue, I have to say, but amongst the contradictory challenges, this is another one that's in there, and a very unwelcome one now, I must say, pulling against the idea of open access to information, the sharing of knowledge. On the question of what to do, I've always admired the work the IAU has done to connect universities around the world, because we all do enter into bilateral and multilateral partnerships, not always intentionally or deliberately, not always with the view in mind that we have an obligation to engage with institutions in different parts of the world and to, in a kind of a co-constructive way, advance the agendas of each institution. I'm not sure there's a substitute for those kinds of wonderful facilitated multilateral partnerships that deliberately bring institutions that have strength or interest in particular areas together, which then creates a conduit through which knowledge can flow, both in the form of students or in the form of researchers. So I'll leave it there, Pam.
Okay, thank you very much. So that leaves us to go to the second question, and that is, now you come back. So Pulen Lenkabura, will you answer give your views on the second question, which is reappraising the mission of education. How can universities evolve their teaching, pedagogy, and mentoring as crucial field of engagement towards transformative education and give more value to these in the staff appraisers and career advancements? So I give the floor to you again, Pauline.
Yes, thank you very much, Pam. I want to share the idea that epistemic pedagogies as part of the global South contribution to the sharing of knowledge or university education as that which mediates between the tension that a colleague was talking about, where competitive practices and cooperative practices have to find resonance to ensuring that the society or the value of knowledge systems becomes resonant. The second aspect is that for us as the University of South Africa, who invented in the world the idea of distance education in 1873, we recognize that the evolution and developments in the 4.0 industrialization and digitalization also offer prospects for ensuring the expansive sharing but also dissemination of knowledge, education, engaged scholarship, and those pedagogies that theorize and mediate the praxis, but also theorization in engaged scholarship. And we believe that this notion of transformative education aligned or entwined with educational technologies to expanding access, to expanding the exchange of research between researchers, students, as repositories, but also as communities, epistemic communities, become quite important. Learners in the current context are not deficient with sources of knowledge, including credentializations of knowledge, because of the digital access that make knowledge or research available. However, the access of platforms, the consistencies of platforms become quite important arenas of looking at whether technologies is a partner in the accomplishment of knowledge that rallies around not just the sustainable development as we understand from the United Nations, but also UNICEF compact that many of us follow, but also aspirations of the contextual knowledge communities and researchers. And to this, I like the work of Amina Mama, because she reminds us that it is in the work of the universities and in looking at these liberatory, emancipatory, innovative, but also life-affirming and ecologically attentive pedagogies, curriculum development, its articulation, and its negotiation. The third aspect that I think is not just the developments in the technologies that are important, but is also our attention to the value systems that you were referring to, Pam, where issues of bias are already issues that we have to tackle. For instance, in my university, we use proctoring systems that also have a facial recognition or voice recognition. But we have also recognized that the minute we work with facial recognition, there's bias, because majority of students who are African, who are Black, the imagery is not comparable. And that's very important, therefore, in thinking around the future of education, how this matters around dignity, inclusivity, emancipatory knowledge that is attentive to humanizing pedagogies, but also that are not just anthropocentric, but are attentive to these planetary responsibilities, economic justice, social justice, inclusivity of abilities, but also the balance between the competition and cooperation, as well as the balance between humanity and ecology, I think make for a magnificent, if not a proposition that UNICEF and the IAU must be considerate of, because when that happens, it's not just beneficial for the global south or for the global north. It is beneficial for humanity. For contestation and competition has taught us that it only moves with humanizing a few, but universities as social institutions must be looking not only at the privileged or the elite, and it must look at the idea of unbundling elitism as that idea of just a few benefiting, but ensuring that we harness knowledge and education, especially higher education, for the majority, if not most people in Earth, so that they can use their moral agency and knowledge to contribute to the flourishing of society and planetary development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we go to the comments, and we stay online. So, Andrew, you are the first one to comment on what Puleng said.
Yeah, and thanks, Puleng, for that very insightful contribution and building on the tension that exists between the competitive nature of our sector and the collaborative or cooperative nature of our sector. I think also the pointing out of the part that technology has played, particularly in recent times as we've maneuvered our way through the pandemic, and the ecological challenges that we face as a society, as well as the references to the biases which are inherent in many of our systems and which we need to address. I think just in terms of my comments, I'd like to refer to the part of the question which talks about career advancement and staff appraisals, and how we might take a somewhat different approach to these aspects of our sector to incorporate in some of the points that Puleng's made. I inherited a university where staff appraisals and career advancement had been reduced down to a set of metrics and a set of expectations of those metrics, which I think is not only dehumanizing, but it doesn't then reward many of the aspects that Puleng has talked about in terms of what we need to be doing as a sector in building the citizens that will inherit our world and will take us through some of the challenges that have been identified. So I think that we really need to look at how we can ensure that our staff appraisal systems look at achievement holistically and look at contributions holistically, and that career advancement is also based on those holistic assessments which can't be based on metrics but have to be based on a qualitative assessment of the contributions that our colleagues have made across all aspects of developing our students, of scholarship and of research and of impact on society. So I think I'll leave it there, and again thank Puleng for her excellent contribution.
Thank you very much. And then I also ask Roberto.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much, for the invitation. I've been involved as a Secretary General of UDWAL and member of IAU for some time, and I've been listening, to the need of having different ways of new teachers, new ways of teaching, new pedagogies, new mentoring, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, probably we have not advanced very much. We, I think, basically continue with the traditional models. And therefore, all these good ideas of society, universities serving societies, being socially engaged, and so on and so forth, look like a pipe dream. to a certain extent. Perhaps I am exaggerating. Of course, I'm sure that there are exceptions, and there are universities that are doing a very good job. But all those topics, I mean, require concrete proposals and concrete practices. I mean, like, for instance, like Patrick was saying, co-creation of knowledge. I mean, that's a different pedagogy. That's a complete different pedagogy of those that we, myself, the speakers, and the nice audience that is with us have been taught, I mean, throughout the years. So I think, as somebody said in another roundtable, we need to shake universities, and because they have been captured by certain pedagogies that pursue certain objectives that perhaps do not belong only to the universities, but are part of the whole system. I mean, I think it's reasonably, I think can reasonably say that the pedagogies that we have respond to the kind of society that we have, and the kind of objectives that that society is pursuing. So if we want a different pedagogy and a different university, we need to change everything, or a lot of things.
A lot of things. Okay, thank you very much. And I think we can come back to this, but there is a lot of things to discuss. And I just want to make one point. I should not do that, but leadership, I said from the beginning, it's also all the people, the academic staff we have, they also have to change, and maybe we have to shake even harder. So, okay, so let's go to the question number 3. Changing? Okay. So, number 3, one back. So, recalibrating relevance and quality. How to expand a definition of quality that breaks free from the pressures of international rankings and elite university models and give more appreciations to the local context. Integrated local and global knowledge systems, and to ensure greater relevance for the student and the community in which the university operates. So I bring you back, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Pam, and thanks to everyone for coming along to this session. It's a privilege to address you on this topic. And Patrick Dean has already given us a little bit of an introduction to rankings there. And I think it is worth pausing and considering where rankings have come from and the impact that they have had, both positive and negative. Of course, the first major ranking was done by Shanghai Jiao Tong University and a research center within that university, which at the behest of the Chinese government put together a way of evaluating what was a world-class university. And they simply looked for metrics which were readily publicly available, and then combined those metrics by applying weightings to each of the metrics to come up with a ranking that kind of looked like it would represent what a world-class university was. Of course, our newspapers then saw that as a great opportunity and followed that up with their own ranking systems. But again, each of those ranking systems was based on metrics which were readily available, supplemented with reputation surveys, which again became metrics. And those metrics, a range of different metrics, combined together with weightings to give a single number, so that the multifaceted operation of a university was reduced then to a single number supposedly representing quality. And of course, those rankings have become the main driver of both university strategies, but also of national government strategies for investment in universities. So it's extraordinary what a small idea can do to an entire sector, an idea which is inherently flawed because it takes readily available metrics as opposed to any other ones, and then puts a set of weights which are not determined by any rational process, but simply by putting a finger in the sand and saying that that looks about right, and let's see what it comes up with. And then this is something which our politicians particularly have taken to heart, but more than that, our governors of universities have taken to heart, because it reduces a very complex contribution that a modern university makes to its society to a single number, which is then far easier for people to understand. So the unfortunate side effect of that has been that universities around the world have been driven to maximize their performance on these particular metrics, neglecting potentially other contributions that they've been making, particularly to their local societies. And they have been encouraged to do so not only by their governance arrangements, but by the politicians in their country. And often those politicians then have put money into university systems to try to push their universities up these rankings. So one could say that in one sense, the rankings have been positive for the sector because they have brought in significantly more government investment than would have come in otherwise. So there's certainly a positive there. I'd say there are probably a couple of other positives, and that's that because of the rankings, we pay much more attention to what is going on in other universities around the world than we did before the advent of rankings. Before the advent of rankings, we tended just to measure ourselves against the local universities in our own city or perhaps in our own country. So I think that can be looked at as a positive. And that good practice then, which is wherever it's developed in the world, can then be propagated. So those are the positives. But as I said, the negatives are very much that the rankings in a very arbitrary way have forced universities to pursue a single model of a university, which is a research-intensive university, which in many cases is not perhaps appropriate for all universities in a city, in a country, in the sector. So that's the first thing I'd like to say in terms of the rankings themselves and the drivers that they've given. I think the pandemic obviously has caused us very significant problems. But one of the things that it has done is to decrease the focus on the rankings for the universities. So what I've seen is that the media focus obviously has gone elsewhere. There have been far more important things for the media to be talking about than world rankings of universities. And the focus of universities, particularly in this part of the world, has switched from pursuing rankings to survival, basically. And as you will be aware, many Australian universities have been relying on income from international students to prop up their operation and to fund particularly their research pursuits and their pursuits of world rankings, meaning that they were hiring in a lot of researchers, supporting researchers, which then, when the international students were not able to come through the pandemic, caused very significant financial crises. So the attention of the universities moved away from the rankings to survival and to how they were configured for the local student population as opposed to the international student population. I think that also the other piece that came out there was that the situation in the pandemic was very different between countries. So the challenges in different countries were different, although the overarching challenge was the same, but the state of the pandemic was very different at different times in different countries. And so both the society and the universities had to respond differently. And so the focus became then much more local. So I would say that the pandemic had a positive impact in refocusing universities on their local environment, on their contribution particularly to the pandemic response locally. So I think that hopefully going forward from this, I would like to see the universities embracing the wider parts of their mission, which includes social justice, widening participation, their contribution to climate justice, to sustainable development, to the environment. So these are all things that I think we can leverage from the pandemic going forward to ensure that we're including these in a much more holistic model of what a university means. Just in terms of, Pam, can you give me an indication how much time
That's an indication, yes.
Okay. So
Yeah. Did you round up there now? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So then I give the floor to Patrick to respond on this.
Andrew, thanks very much. You did a really wonderful job talking about both the growth and development of the rankings and the impact of the rankings. That's a really important account to have in this discussion. And when you mentioned government's engagement with the rankings, I was struck, my mind went where you went eventually, to the whole question of higher education as an export commodity. So governments have been very interested in something we all care about, right, which is the global dimension of education. But in our country, for example, the government moved during a particular period to thinking of higher education as something you'd lump in with international trade. And that, of course, potentially led the sector in a direction very different from the way in which we naturally would have wanted to go, which would have been towards defining and exemplifying and pursuing a truly globally engaged model of higher education. So that, thanks, Andrew. It's actually one of the more pernicious effects of the rankings that it alerted government to the economic potential of something that is then potentially an academic peril when you go down that route. And it also, as you rightly said, puts universities in a vulnerable position, as proved to be the case during COVID. But I do think that whole question opens up the two-edged sword of the global academy, which is we want students to move, we want there to be a great deal of mobility between institutions, but that has been infused with a kind of cold-hearted economic model, which doesn't necessarily speak to the interests we all have. So I was thinking, just getting to the question Andrew was addressing there, what means there is of evaluating quality outside of those rankings. And here I'm going to say something positive about one set of rankings, and this is the Times Higher Impact Rankings. Because I think the moment you shift from that original Shanghai Jiaotong sense of what matters in academic life to saying the 17 SDGs are the framework within which we're going to assess this, it suddenly becomes possible for a small institution in the Global South, which is doing fabulous work in its local community to alleviate poverty, to address water issues, and so on, to do well. So theoretically, I'm not saying the methodology necessarily achieves this all the time, but theoretically, this is a way of shifting the focus so that a local impact generated by a university can count towards global standing. And I think that's really important. And the very idea that each of the 17 goals, well, if you take the 17th out, if you take the 16 goals, they all have a local and they have a global manifestation. And if universities are operating particularly well in their local context, something like the impact rankings can really help pick that up and bring the attention of the world to that institution. So I do think that's, insofar as it is useful to have these global assessments of institutions relative to each other, that is moving in the right direction by focusing on local impact through something that actually matters more than simply economic benefit to a country. Looking at the 17 goals seems to be the best framework.
No, Inga, I will give you an opportunity to react later, but Inga is on the...
Thank you so much, Patrick, because you mentioned impact ranking, and it's particularly relevant to my institution, as I represent a very small specialized university of social sciences, and you know that the possibilities to be ranked are quite limited. But by the way, when I started my rector's position, I had a huge question: how to lead the community towards more openness, towards the local needs, and towards rankings as well. So our strategy was, first of all, to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals. And we started together with IAU the journey towards the whole institutional approach towards sustainability. So it was our one strategy. Another strategy, of course, of reskilling and upskilling, and we opened up through new flexible ways of learning and introducing to the community new modules, which also had a very positive impact for this inclusiveness and openness. And after this year, successfully, we are already ranked in Times Higher Education Impact Rankings. So this is our story.
Okay. So, and we go to the question 4.
3. Oh,
4 already.
4.
Yes.
4.
So, sorry.
Building global citizenship. If higher education is a common good to be fostered for both collective and individual advancement, how can higher education inculcate a more meaningful sense of collective and individual agency and enlarge the scope of their curricula with the deeper social, ethical, and conceptual questions that go beyond the immediate purview of the subject matter? So, long questions to Patrick.
That's a really easy one. So I'm going to begin by just going back to pick up on some things Puleng said, and to also to focus on that word agency that's in the question. Because I think this is all about agency, and I think we're seeing a turn in universities towards placing greater emphasis on institutional agency, and particularly the agency that can be exercised by students, who, along with our researchers, are the people with the greatest potential to have impact in the world. I'm more optimistic, Roberta, than you are about changing pedagogical methods, because one of the really, it's bizarre to talk about anything fortunate in the context of COVID, but my observation is that we've been driven by the COVID experience to become much more experimental with the ways in which we teach. You know, if you put to one side the period when we were all completely online, now we're trying to do things differently. In my institution, I see a deep emphasis on experiential learning, service learning, forms of learning that don't even involve assessment, learning that can occur off the campus much more commonly, learning that can occur in partnership with community organizations. All of this is fabulous. I mean, so speaking as a teacher, I think it's great for personal growth. Speaking as a person who cares about the planet, I really am excited by this, because I think all of these things are building agency in our students. At our institution, we're pushing really hard on inculcating a capacity for thoughtful research in students at every level, right down to the first year, because we see that sort of ability to analyze, to assess data, and so on as a vital life skill that will empower students beyond. But I want to really focus on the question of how you animate an institution to lead in this way. In other words, how does a leader lead an institution that's purportedly going to provide some leadership? One thing I notice at the moment is a powerful hunger. I've heard this in other sessions at the conference, a powerful hunger in students who, as a result of COVID, do not have the same confidence in their future that students of earlier generations had. They are So they were concerned about the environment beforehand. They were concerned about global inequities. Now they're concerned about even the viability of having reasonable career plans and expectations of a family. And now they're hearing about the threat of nuclear weapons being used. It's a very, very difficult time for young people. And that translates into a hunger. They want to be useful. They want to have the tools to be useful. They want to pursue an education within a framework that actually makes clear what the point of it is. So here I go to our colleague Chris Brink, who's written often. He always puts it this way. He says the question is not what do universities do? That's not the question. The question is what are they for? What's the point? So I think what is needed now is the deliberate articulation by leaders of universities of a goal for it all that goes beyond simply the inherited assumptions about what a university education is for. We all know that stuff, we all believe it. But does that excite our students, and does it provide them with a sense of agency as they ponder a really, frankly, bleak future? And I don't think it does. On the other hand, we introduced a program providing grants to students who wanted to develop SDG-related student initiatives in partnership with our local community. Incredible take-up on this. And this is even occurring outside of the context of normal assessment and the according of marks. So to Andrew's point about what gets credit in a university, faculty members who support students learning in this way need to receive credit, and the students themselves need to do it. In my institution, I'm battling the belief that this is really volunteer stuff students should do on the side, and if they do it, that's a sign that they're virtuous. That's not the point. They will do it anyway. And they always have. Fabulous. Every university I've ever been associated with has this powerful contingent of student volunteers, but they are learning when they're doing that. And I think it's really important for our institutions to evolve in ways that accord credit to all that stuff that doesn't seem part of the traditional academy. If we don't do that, I think we will not really serve either the interests of our students or the interests of the world at large. And the wonderful thing, and this is how I'll end, I think there are many taxonomies you could use for understanding the impact an institution should have. The SDGs are fabulous, though. I can't think of a better one because they cover the spectrum, right? Yeah. So, like Inga, we did our assessment for the Times Higher. It involved 700 separate pieces of evidence that had to be assessed. We know things about ourselves we didn't know before, and now we can build on those things. And what we're building on is an ability to be more effective in addressing those 17 goals. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you very much. New inputs, I would say. So, Andrew, your comments on this?
Yeah, thanks very much, Patrick, for very insightful comments there. And I think the provision of credit for some of the types of activities that you talked about is very interesting. And I know that some universities have moved either towards the provision of credit or towards a co-certification of those activities, those extracurricular activities, and probably the co-certification is one which is more common. I think it's also worthwhile thinking about what we need to put into the curricula to more formally engage the students with questions of social justice, with questions of climate equality, with questions of sustainability in a more formal way, and how that might be done in a way that engages universities around the world. And it does strike me that the International Association of Universities is one platform through which we might consider that question and consider how we might come up with a common set of modules where we brought our students together to engage in these types of questions. So I'm realizing that we're a bit over time, but I just put that out there as a challenge for us in the IAU to consider going forward.
Thank you very much. Roberto.
Well, I will take one of the points that Patrick mentioned that I think is crucial. I mean, what universities are for. And they are not for themselves. But and I say so because all these rankings have promoted the idea that universities are for themselves and to have, I don't know, Nobel Prizes, the best number of PhDs and so on and so forth, and doctors and so on, instead of looking at what the context, I mean, is telling them to do, you know, and the response, I mean, I agree with Patrick. I mean, it's perhaps too strong to say that nothing has happened. Fortunately, one of the good results, or one of the good side effects, if I can say so, I mean, of the pandemic is that economists and sociologists and politicians, I mean, had to go outside and see that society is quite unequal in some parts of the world, if not in most parts of the world, and that something had to be done. I mean, doctors and nurses and so on do that from the very beginning. I mean, they always go, I mean, after the second semester, I mean, they start touching people and looking at their eyes and so on and so forth. And that is very good. That's a different pedagogy, you know? And that teaches them, I mean, gives them flavor, if I can say, and context, which is what is really more important. We need professionals, but we need more citizens with good professional skills. But not, I mean, I listened to a student in one of the round tables saying, well, I'm finishing, I'm in one of the very she's graduating from one of the very prestigious universities in the United States. And she said, well, I am about to become a professional to earn good money. We don't need that. I mean, of course, I mean, it's quite legitimate to think and to aspire that if I study, I don't know, whatever I decided to do, I earn a bit of more money. But that should not be the most important aim in my life. My main aim is how I cooperate with the other one to solve. And I can tell you that because the Africans are, and I from Latin America and the Caribbean, but I'm sure that the Africans, Asians, even in Europe and in the United States, just look how we have to just remember the results of Joseph Stiglitz's research on inequality in the United States to be aware of what's happening there. So I leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we are at question number 5. So driving social transformation, that will be you to continue that. So how can universities convincingly engage in sustainable transformation to overcome social inequalities and stop reproducing the very conditions underlying these changes? So go on, where you ended.
That's my question. Well, before I say I share with my dear colleagues, I mean, some reflections on the question. I would like to say that what I'm saying comes from a large discussion, I mean, that we have given at UDWAL with many people, and some of them are here, and I would like to mention that, I mean, we produce a document that I hope is in the portal of UNESCO in the conference. Dolly Montoya, who is our president, gave a lot of insights into the document. Rector Arim, I mean, from this very important Uruguayan university, UDELAR, also contributed very forcefully, I mean, to this document. And others who are not part of UDWAL, but were very important. Telemaco Talavera, who is here, also gave very valuable comments. Ana Lucia Gasola, who was president of ESR. So I cannot speak, I mean, to give my view if I don't say that they are not only my own views. I mean, they are the views of many people that contributed at UDWAL. There are many others, I mean, that I don't have time to mention, but thank you very much to all of them. Well, I think what really happens is that the model that we have, the economic and socioeconomic and political model that we have, on which universities are involved, that sit on that, is unsustainable. It's absolutely unsustainable. If we continue that, we are going, I mean, right, where, as our friend said to me, we are going very well organized to disaster, you know? We're walking towards a very well organized path for disaster. And so if we believe on that hypothesis, universities have to change. I mean, it's a structural problem, you know, that is really at the end of the day what is mattering. Yeah. So we have really from universities. Again, I would like to bring this idea of shaking. I mean, we have to. I mean, these universities that we have by and large, I mean, are not doing the job good enough. You know, I mean, I'm not. I mean, perhaps and I don't want to give the impression that I don't want to feel anybody to feel offended by what I'm saying, because there are very distinguished academics here in this room. But at the same time, I think we have to recognize that we academics have to stop, I mean, from this idea that we are Superman. You know, we produce knowledge, we know what to do, and we go to the communities because we are saying, I mean, universities have to be involved with the local context and so on, and that's nice, you know, and that's a way of washing our sins and so on. But we suffer, I mean, by and large, on many occasions, this idea, as I said, this disease or whatever we can call it, I mean, the Superman. I produce knowledge, I know what to do, I go there, I diagnose the illness and say, if you follow this, the problem is solved. And I can give you examples in which, when that has happened, things have not gone better, have not improved, quite the opposite. So what we have to do is to really learn from each other, cooperate with the other one, to say, I have this hypothesis about this problem, what is yours? What is more feasible? How can we put them together? I mean, is there any is this any convergence possible? I mean, of what to do? Or perhaps, as doing that exercise, something else emerges, and we can put it into practice. But that, I mean, requires a change of matrix, I would say. Yeah, change of matrix of mind, of attitude, and learning. I mean, what the kind of things that we are learning. Let me tell you that the most distinguished neoliberals that promise everything for the best for the world were educated in our universities. I mean, we don't have to forget that. So, we don't need those. We need something, I mean, other people, other people, to make the possibility of a sustainable world in which we can live all together in a more equal condition. I will stop there.
Okay, thank you. So, Inga.
Thank you for inspiration, Roberto. You are completely right. We are responsible for the persons which we produced. So if we want more social transformation, if we want this just, peaceful, sustainable world, we have to rethink the way we teach, the way we learn, and the way we interact between each other. And COVID, I think, showed us a lot how this social dimension and our collaboration within and outside our communities is valuable for the future of our student future labor force. The primary purpose of this future ideal education, I think, is to empower our learners to see the social world differently, and especially it's important to see the social world through ethical lens, through critical reflection and thinking, which leads to an imperative to think and act towards more positive changes. What I mean with this ethical, as without ethical society, respect to human rights, rule of law, democratic values, we will not create what we idealize. And in this industrialized world, artificial intelligence solutions may start to collapse our societies very soon. So I am for our intensive work within communities, for the importance of preparing citizens who are able to engage in civil life of their communities and their societies.
Yeah, good comments. And then back to the online. So, Belang.
Thank you very much, Pam. I like what Roberto stated around the idea of ensuring that knowledge is not just resident within the educators, researchers, or students within our universities. And I think this is quite true to the current context, because even as we reflect around universities, they seem not to be the only sites of knowledge, of skills development, of contribution of knowledge and research into transformative impulses that colleagues have stated, including the ideas of ethics, moral agency, the idea of students who are imagining their future in the context of experiences of pandemics, such as the COVID pandemic. And this is an area that we as university must also transform our imagination about the task, the role, and the place of universities within society, whether in the local or in the global context. For the competitiveness is also deriving from private industry or sectors of societies that never participated in the research or knowledge agenda, but who are currently shaping such research. Andrew earlier on talked about how rankings invited governments into universities, but also investments into universities. I'd like to add on that point to say they did not just invite governments, but the competitive leveraging of intellectual property rights by private sector became also an important area that in the current context, and as we reflect on the Sustainable Development Goals, or whether the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, or in my own country, the National Development Plan, or the aspirations of communities, youth and young adults, and society, those who are organized politically or those who are not organized, I think the transformation of the university, therefore, begs the question, are we as universities willing to engage with these sectors and with these knowledge systems that were not in the center or mainstream to university objectivity and research, and those values that have been quite central of competition, of individual research, of academic autonomy, and sometimes somewhat indifferent to these contextual experiences, whether global or local. The other aspect that I think is quite important in this transformation discourse is how, in the current context, we begin to start thinking beyond pedagogies or curriculum that is specialized. The issues of co-curricular credentials was already been spoken about. But I'm thinking about how does natural sciences engage and have a constructive, substantive engagement with humanities and social sciences in order that even the innovative outputs of universities, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's predictive learning or high computing, or whether it's biotechnologies or nanotechnologies, their deployment to societies or to industry are not negating the very dignity of humanity or even of ecological flourishing for the future. For we have learned even in the context of COVID-19 that the solutions were not just scientifically based or university-based. It was when the multidisciplinary, multi-community, and those co-constructive approaches to knowledge and to seeking solutions to the pandemic and its death-dealing impact, not only in economically marginal environments, but also amongst elite communities in the global arena. So this, for me, is an invitation on how universities can also harness thematic, multidisciplinary, but also the idea of sciences always engaging with each other, disseminated and co-constructed or shared with communities. That notion of engaged scholarship or the notion of attentive education. And finally, I cannot engage in the transformation of university as a woman who's a feminist scholar in ethics by not asserting the imperative of ensuring that women, communities on the margins from power dynamics of the university, their scholarship, their ideas, and their innovations in the university systems, in society, in industry sector, including in IAU, are taken seriously as rallying points for ensuring that the value proposition of universities is not only for its own sake, but transfers and translates to this idea of liberation, emancipation, dignity, social justice, human rights, whilst at the same time allowing wonder and research as important levers for encouraging universities' contributions to society. So I would like to conclude by saying, yes, the developments in digitalization systems, in artificial intelligence, in the 4.0 industrialization are important, but they cannot be meaningful if they are death-dealing. Okay. They cannot be meaningful if universities are complicit and do not as well ensure that their implications, positive and negative, are understood across the sectors and across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, time is running. This is not. So if there is no urgent comments from the panel, I would like to open for a few questions from the audience. And I don't see, so if I can get some help with the mic and if you can present yourself. Is the microphone, could you?
Thank you very much. I'm a friend of International Association of Universities, and I think only this organization could put together such an interesting panel, and also a panel with such, I would say, radical viewpoints. So I'm very happy. My question is really to us as members of IAU. Could we use IAU to transform the trade-related intellectual property rights agreement to actually get rid of the whole trade-related property right. As the South African representatives show, it's a tremendously destructive agreement. It causes more inequality in the world than any other agreement, and it jeopardizes the idea of academic freedom and openness in the academic community. So could we use this global organization as a tool for bringing down this agreement, which seems to be growing in importance today due to the role of the pharmaceutical industry? Actually, it was the pharmaceutical industry that created this agreement and captured the states, first in the US, then in Japan, and then in Europe, for this agreement. We need to recapture the public space. And my next question is, how do we deal with the ranking system? We heard some ideas about how they jeopardize our universities, also the positive side, but they create a corrupt system. People at universities are reporting on these rankings in playing the game in a corrupt way. So should we not get rid of it? Should we not tell the universities, member of IAU, not to report to the ranking system? Should we not? And if we are not doing that, should we not then also develop rankings that are negative? We should give minus points to universities that produce knowledge for the oil industry, for the weapon industry, that are socially reproducing social inequality, like the universities in the US. There are 60% white men for 70% white rich students. So, and we could go through a number of issues, human rights issues. We could create a negative, and the highly ranked universities in the US would actually fall very far down if we had a ranking system like that. And my final, and Helge, a final question. We had today a launch of the report, Universities, Knowledge for Action, how to transform universities for the SDG work. And in that report, there's a proposal for a new benchmarking system that the universities control, that grows from below, that really shows the best practice and learning arenas for the SDGs. Should we not support that and then forget reporting on the rankings? Sorry for using so much time, Helge.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would like to say before I give you the floor, and that is, in the limit of time, we would appreciate, and we will take this further because this is in the preparations of the General Conference. So please give comments, statements that we can bring forward, because if we let this panel in again, we will have 2 hours. So over there.
Buenas tardes. Muchas gracias. Hablo en español porque
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to speak Spanish. It's my mother tongue, and Spanish is, after all, one of the official languages of the UNESCO. With all due respect to those speaking other languages, can I congratulate all of you for the work that you have done, and also to the panelists for that very excellent presentation. Well, you talked about a common good, and that is also a public good. The Director General of UNESCO yesterday spoke about a public good, but let us use the term that has been used, which is a public good rather than a common good. And go to Wikipedia if you want to know the difference between the two. But it's not the same thing, because here there's a question on common good, which is public good. So another point I'd like to raise is that apart from the rankings, all universities need to commit themselves to transparency. It's not a question just of use of resources, but also information. And this is related to evaluation as well. Evaluation can't be punitive, but I'm here to present my strengths and my weaknesses, and let us work together from different parts of the world, virtually or in presence, to make sure what our weaknesses and our strengths are. That is the global from the local. You cannot have any global growth without local growth, with identity and social justice. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm Telemaco Calavera from the team Galavos.
I will break think. Is there somewhere else?
Genera la diversidad lingüística, también lo voy a hacer en español. A la UNESCO.
Yes, I work in the UNESCO. I'm also going to speak in Spanish. So I'm going to speak in Spanish because I think it's important that we consider the multilingual aspect of UNESCO. I just wanted to refer to the following. That we have a window of opportunities here for really transforming society. One of the greatest concerns, which I'd like to bring to the table, is that we have to avoid the mistakes of the past. No, I get a bit worried when people say, we know what we need to do. Or well, we have the knowledge of what we need to do. Be careful about being overconfident. We have to be much more open to what's been said today and what UNESCO has put in the document. We have to be a lot more open to society. If society has done something wrong in the past, and with universities, and this is an Achilles heel, well, it's been arrogance. The arrogance of thinking that we have the right answer to society. That just, having a knowledge of society is enough to improve society. But it's a lot more complex. And there's the report that our colleague mentioned, and that shows that there's the aspect of interdisciplinarity. There's you need a transdisciplinary approach, and so we mustn't oversimplify things. We have to dialogue with society, and we have to be open epistemologically to social dialogue, and that requires us to shed our prejudices and the way we see the other as being somehow inferior, or that they don't have the same knowledge that we have. And it requires a very democratic form of dialogue. Now, we have to avoid the sort of arrogance of the past, and I think that that's a very important thing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to finish this session. First of all, there is so much of messages, and I think that we can make an applause to the panelists before I ask two other persons to come up. And we have a lot to bring to the meeting in Dublin. But I would like to the General Secretary of IAU to come up, and also Remus Repre, who is my Vice President for IAU. And do you need a mic? Yes.
We need a mic.
Where's the mic?
It's over there.
So very quickly, I would like to thank the speakers for the excellent contributions. We may ask them to write it up, which will be more difficult, and maybe they didn't see that come, but we would then be able to also publish the contributions, because I think there is a lot of food for further thought, as we see from the questions as well. So thank you very much. Also for the two speakers whom we don't see online, but if you want to put them back up, that would be really nice if they're still there. So thank you very much also, Andrew, and for Puleng for having been with us. So very quickly, you saw on the chairs that this is the issue that we prepared for the UNESCO World Conference. Also asking other universities who could not come to contribute to the discussion on how do we reimagine higher education for the future. So you will find 39 papers in this issue, thinking about or sharing with us how they see the future of higher education. As well, Pam mentioned it at the beginning, there is a conference coming up in Dublin, which will focus on relevance and value of higher education for the future. Any of you wishing to contribute to that issue, you're more than welcome. So contact us if you want to contribute a paper of around 600 to 800 words, which is kind of an appetizer on the future of higher education and discussing relevance and value of higher education to the future society. Please do so. We will be very pleased to publish it, because we want to have as many voices in on these very, very important issues. So this is the the magazine that we have, you are always welcome to come in and contribute to that discussion. But I would like to give the floor to a more important person than me, which is to you, Remus, who has helped us a lot through CNCPA. You will be able to indicate that as well. But you have been very instrumental in assisting us in producing a book that is actually discussing the promise of higher education. And I want to thank you before giving you the floor.
Thank you. Maybe I am a very important person, but as you are my boss, so you are more important than me. Yes, the board of International Association of Universities decided many years ago to support a book that will be published under the under the auspices of 70 years of IAU. It was not published at 70, it was 70 plus 1. It was not for the General Conference because we didn't have a General Conference yet in Dublin, but we will have this October. But the book is here. Many colleagues who have participated during the years to the work of IAU have expressed their opinions here. I am one of the authors. Our president opened the book, and I think each story or contribution is an interesting opinion about the evolution of IAU during the years. Somehow I started to understand and to work on international education by finding the handbook of the international book of all universities around the world in a corner of the Library of Ministry of Education back in 1996. But because I have the mic, I will not let this mic go from my hands till I will congratulate the panel, and I underline I do agree with these opinions, but also I have some other opinions. We have our part of an unaccomplished mission, but we are not 100% for what's going around. University is embedded in society. Where is society at large represented here in the conference? We attended in 2009, many of us, the conference, and national delegations were led by ministers. I am a former Minister of Education in Romania, so I can afford to speak about this. I would like to congratulate the UNESCO for organizing this conference, but I cannot notice, and it's not the guilty of UNESCO, I cannot go further without noticing that our ministers are not interested of the discussion. Maybe with ministers, because ministers are the one implementing, building policies, trying to assess where it's a missing link. It's not just universities fought for different unsuccessful policies. So universities were born in the middle of community, and if we want to shape or reshape something, we have to do exactly the same way, together with the community. And the last word, and I'll stop, we have a lot of confusions, and not because we are not able to understand this, but we were discussing about citizenship. I have a question, and I don't have answers. What kind of citizenship should I consider when I train my students? Romanian, Russian, Ukrainian, European, global? So maybe when we find the answers, we will have a better higher education system. Thank you very much.
We have some answers. We have some answers.
So we need another session, definitely. We haven't finished here. There are many other sessions that you wish to attend this afternoon and tomorrow. And so thank you very much for having attended, and looking forward to further discussions.
Okay, thanks, Pulang.
Thank you, Andrew. Have a lovely one. Thank you.